You're lying in bed, browsing your phone before sleep, and suddenly an ad appears for exactly that product you thought about buying yesterday, but never searched for, never mentioned to anyone, just thought about. You feel a shiver run down your spine. How do they know? Then you convince yourself it must have been a coincidence, or perhaps you mentioned it in some conversation near your phone and didn't even notice. But deep down, very deep down, that disturbing sensation remains that something or someone is closer to your thoughts than they should be. This silent invasion is not paranoia, no distant science fiction. It's the reality being constructed now, brick by brick, algorithm by algorithm, as you read these words. In the next few minutes, I'll show you how we're walking toward a future where the last frontier of human privacy, your own thoughts, may cease to be yours. And what's most frightening is that this future isn't decades away. It could be complete even before 2030. But there's something you need to understand now, something that can completely change how you navigate this world emerging around you. For millennia, the human mind was the only truly private sanctuary we possessed. Kings could invade your homes. Totalitarian regimes could control your actions and words, but your thoughts remained inviolable. This was always the last line of defense of human freedom. Even in the most oppressive regimes in history, even under the cruelest tortures, there always existed an internal space where you were absolutely free. Your thoughts were yours. This fundamental reality shaped the entire evolution of our civilization, our laws, our concepts of dignity and autonomy. The very notion of individual consciousness, this sense of a separate and private self, always depended on this basic premise that there exists an inner world that no one else can access. Philosophers debated for centuries about the nature of consciousness and free will, but they all agreed on at least one thing. Your thoughts were exclusively yours to know. This reality is changing in ways that very few people truly understand. We are witnessing the beginning of the era of neural transparency, where technology is developing the capacity not just to influence our thoughts, as it always did through propaganda and persuasion, but to literally read and predict our mental processes with a precision that would have been considered impossible just a decade ago. We're talking about systems that can identify patterns in your brainwaves and translate these patterns into words and images. We're talking about artificial intelligence algorithms that can predict your choices even before you become aware that you're making a choice. And we're talking about a technological infrastructure being built right now to not only capture this data, but to use it in ways that fundamentally alter what it means to have a private mind. Consider the following. Every time you interact with your smartphone, every search you make, every pause you take while typing an email, every fraction of a second that your eyes remain fixed on a specific image while scrolling through social media feeds, you're providing data about your mental processes. These aren't just data about your preferences or external behaviors. They're data about how your brain works, about how you process information, about the specific patterns of your thinking. Machine learning algorithms have become so sophisticated that they can build predictive models of your mental activity that in many cases know your preferences and inclinations better than you yourself know them. I'm not using hyperbole here. Studies have repeatedly demonstrated that algorithms can predict human behaviors with a precision that surpasses people's own predictions about themselves. But this is just the beginning, because we're now entering a new phase of this revolution. Brain-computer interfaces, which until recently were the exclusive domain of science fiction and highly specialized research laboratories, are rapidly becoming commercial reality. Companies led by some of the world's most influential entrepreneurs are developing devices that can literally read electrical signals directly from your brain. The justification presented is always altruistic and difficult to contest. These technologies will help people with paralysis move robotic limbs with their thoughts. They will allow people with speech disabilities to communicate directly through their neural patterns. They will enable you to control your computer or smartphone just by thinking, dramatically increasing the efficiency of your interaction with technology. And all these benefits are real. They represent genuinely transformative advances that will alleviate immense human suffering. But there's a second layer to this story that is rarely discussed with the seriousness it deserves. Because once the technology exists to read your brain signals for benign purposes, the same technology can be used for much more. And we're not just talking about dystopian scenarios of authoritarian governments forcing citizens to wear brain-reading devices. We're talking about something much more subtle and, in a way, much more likely. We're talking about a future where you will voluntarily adopt these technologies because they make your life more convenient, more connected, more efficient. You will use these interfaces because they will allow you to operate in the digital world with a fluidity that will make the use of keyboards and touchscreens seem primitive. And in the process, you'll be transmitting your thoughts, not just your actions, to systems that exist beyond your control. Imagine that in 2028, you buy a new device that promises to revolutionize your productivity. It's an elegant band you wear around your head while working, and it reads your brain signals to understand when you're focused, when you're distracted, when you're creative, when you're tired. The device automatically adjusts your digital work environment to optimize your mental state. When it detects you're losing focus, it silences notifications and adjusts your screen lighting. When it detects you're in a mental state conducive to creativity, it opens your brainstorming tools and suggests you dedicate the next 30 minutes to creative work. Users of this device report dramatic increases in productivity and job satisfaction. You decide to try it. In the first days, you're impressed. The device really seems to understand you in ways no previous technology managed. But what you don't realize, because it's buried in 50 pages of terms of service you never read completely, is that all the neural data this device collects is being stored and analyzed. The company that manufactures the device is building an extremely detailed model of how your brain works. This model knows when you're most susceptible to suggestions. It knows which types of messages resonate most deeply with your specific neural structures. It knows when you're in mental states where your critical defenses are low, and this model doesn't remain only with the company that manufactures the device. It's sold, shared, integrated into larger data ecosystems about you that exist in corporate and governmental networks you don't even know exist? I want to pause for a moment to ask you directly, have you stopped to consider how many of your thoughts and decisions are really yours? How many times have you bought something, clicked on something, felt something, and then wondered why you made that decision? I know many of us go through these moments of doubt in silence, perhaps even blaming ourselves for lack of self-control or mental clarity. But what if these doubts are signs of something bigger happening? If this topic is stirring something you've been feeling, share in the comments. My biggest concern about the future of mental privacy is your reflection can help others put into words what they're feeling, and perhaps together we can begin to better understand the contours of this transformation we're all experiencing. Now, some of you may be thinking I'm painting an overly grim scenario. After all, tech companies already collect enormous amounts of data about us, and most people live their lives normally without feeling they've lost their autonomy. But there's a fundamental difference between what's happening now and what's to come. The data being collected about you today is mainly about your external actions, what you click, what you buy, where you go, with whom you communicate. These are indirect reflections of your mental states, but the technologies emerging now have the potential to capture your mental states directly without the mediation of external behaviors. And this difference isn't just quantitative, it's qualitatively transformative. Consider how current recommendation algorithms work. They observe that you watched 5 videos about a certain topic, then infer you're interested in this topic, and recommend similar videos. It's a trial and error process based on statistical patterns. But imagine a system that can directly detect when a certain type of content generates a specific emotional response in your neural patterns. This system doesn't need to guess what you like based on your past behavior. It knows in real time what's generating emotional engagement in your brain, and it can use this knowledge to calibrate with surgical precision the content it presents to you to maximize whatever metric it's optimizing, whether engagement time, purchase, probability, or ideological conformity. The history of technology teaches us that whenever a new capability becomes possible, it's eventually implemented regardless of initial ethical concerns. We've seen this with facial recognition, with mass surveillance, with algorithmic manipulation of news feeds. The trajectory is always the same. First, the technology is developed for limited and defensible use cases. Then, gradually, its use expands to contexts the original creators never imagined or intended. And at the end, we discover we've created a control infrastructure that would be the envy of any authoritarian regime in history, but which was built piece by piece through apparently reasonable decisions made by individuals who believed they were simply making people's lives more convenient. There's also a dimension of this transformation that's even deeper and more disturbing. It's not just that others can read your thoughts. It's that the very nature of your thoughts can be shaped in ways you cannot detect. We already know algorithms can place us in filter bubbles where we're exposed only to information that reinforces our existing beliefs. But imagine a future where algorithms, having direct access to your neural patterns, can identify exactly which types of information generate the strongest emotional responses in you, and then orchestrate your information experience to maximize these responses, you would still have the illusion of free thought, of forming your own opinions, but your cognitive processes would be subtly guided in specific directions through algorithmic curation of your reality experience. This phenomenon is already happening in primitive form. Studies show that the order in which information is presented, the context in which it appears, even the speed with which you're exposed to different ideas, all of this profoundly influences not just what you think, but how you think. And these effects operate largely below the level of consciousness. You believe you're thinking for yourself, that you're reaching conclusions based on independent reasoning, when in reality, your cognitive processes are being shaped by choice architectures that were carefully designed by others to achieve specific outcomes. Now, multiply this effect by 1,000 when systems have direct access to your neural patterns and the ability to adjust their interventions in real time based on instantaneous neural feedback. The fundamental philosophical question that emerges here is what happens to the concept of free will in a world where your thoughts are transparent and manipulable? The Western philosophical tradition has always had endless debates about whether free will really exists or is an illusion. But these debates always assumed that, illusory or not, at least the subjective experience of choice was private. You could debate whether your choices were really free, but at least the mental processes through which you arrived at those choices were yours to experience. But what does choice mean when every stage of your decision process is being monitored and potentially influenced by external systems? Do you still have free will if an algorithm knows the choice you're going to make before you become aware you're making a choice? There are historical precedents that can help us understand the contours of this transformation. During the Cold War, both sides invested heavily in mind control techniques, brainwashing programs, experiments with psychoactive drugs, attempts to use hypnosis and conditioning to control human behavior. These programs were widely considered failures. They discovered that the human mind is remarkably resistant to direct manipulation. You can torture someone until they say what you want to hear, but it's extremely difficult to make someone genuinely believe something through direct external intervention. The architecture of human consciousness has built-in defenses against this type of gross invasion. But what we're facing now is fundamentally different from those brutal 20th century experiments. We're not talking about attempts to force thoughts from outside in. We're talking about systems that work with, not against, the natural processes of your mind. Systems that understand how your brain forms beliefs, how you process emotions, how you reach decisions, and that use this understanding to gently guide your cognitive processes in specific directions in ways that seem completely natural to you. You don't feel you're being manipulated because the manipulation is operating at the level of the cognitive mechanisms through which you form your sense of reality. Consider also the legal and political implications of this transformation. Our entire legal systems are built on the assumption of private mental intent. The difference between murder and manslaughter depends on what was happening in the defendant's mind at the moment of the crime. Attorney-client privilege exists because private conversations are considered essential for the functioning of justice. The right to remain silent protects you from being forced to testify against yourself. But what happens to all these legal protections in a world where your thoughts are no longer private? If a court can access your neural data, can it be used as evidence against you? If an algorithm can demonstrate you were thinking about committing a crime before actually committing it, can this be used to justify preventive arrest? These are not hypothetical questions. They are questions that courts around the world will begin to face in the next decade. The geopolitical dimension of this transformation also cannot be ignored. Countries that develop advanced neural reading and influence capabilities will have immeasurable strategic advantages. Imagine a nation that can, through subtle technologies embedded in consumer products exported globally, monitor the mental states of populations in rival countries and potentially influence these states in ways that promote stability or instability according to their strategic interests. This is not fiction. It's a logical extension of capabilities that already exist in primitive form and are rapidly evolving. The arms race of the 21st century won't just be about kinetic or cyber weapons. It will be about cognitive weapons, about capabilities to influence and potentially control the mental processes of entire populations. But perhaps the most deeply disturbing aspect of this transformation isn't what it means for privacy or freedom, but what it means for the very nature of human experience. Throughout the entire history of our species, the subjective experience of having a mind, of thinking, of feeling, of wanting, was something fundamentally private and incommunicable. You can never really know what it's like to be another person. This fundamental separation between consciousnesses has always been the basic condition of human existence. It shaped our art, our philosophy, our religion, our interpersonal relationships. The essential solitude of each individual consciousness, the fact that each of us is fundamentally alone inside our own mind, this has always been part of what it means to be human. But what happens when this barrier begins to dissolve? When algorithms can not just infer your mental states, but literally read your thoughts with increasing precision, some people suggest this could lead to an era of unprecedented empathy, where we can finally really understand each other because we can directly access each other's mental experiences. But I suspect the reality will be much more complex and problematic, because genuine empathy requires not just access to another person's mental states, but a choice to care about these states. And in a world where thoughts are transparent, where there is no longer a private sanctuary to process emotions and form identity, the very possibility of developing a coherent sense of self may be at risk. Think about how you use your mental privacy now. You use it to process difficult emotions away from others' judgment. You use it to form tentative opinions you're not yet ready to defend publicly. You use it to fantasize, to explore dangerous or taboo ideas, to be less than perfectly virtuous in your thoughts, even when you strive to be virtuous in your actions. This is the essential function of mental privacy, not just protecting secrets, but providing a space where you can be imperfectly human without immediate consequences. It's in this private space that you develop self-awareness, that you learn about yourself, that you grow as a person. And if this space ceases to exist, if every thought is being monitored and potentially judged, what happens to the process of becoming a person? There's also a crucial temporal dimension here that cannot be ignored. The transformations I'm describing won't happen all at once. They'll happen gradually through 1,000 small changes that individually seem reasonable or even beneficial. You'll start using an app that improves your meditation by monitoring your brainwaves. Then you'll add a device that increases your concentration at work. Later, you'll adopt a neural interface because all your colleagues are using it and you don't want to fall behind. Each step will seem logical at the moment, and only looking back, perhaps 10 or 15 years from now, you'll realize you crossed a fundamental threshold, that you surrendered something essential about your humanity in exchange for conveniences that now seem trivial compared to what was lost. This is the trap of gradual technological transformations. They don't ask for your informed consent all at once. They only ask you to take a small step, then another, and each individual step is difficult to refuse because the immediate benefits are real while the costs are abstract and distant. It's like the famous analogy of the frog in boiling water. If you put a frog in boiling water, it will jump out immediately. But if you put a frog in warm water and gradually increase the temperature, it will stay there until it's cooked. We are the frogs, and the temperature is rising. But because the change is gradual, because each increment seems manageable, we keep adapting instead of jumping out. So what do we do with this knowledge? How do we navigate a future where mental privacy may be at risk? First, we need to recognize this is not a problem that can be solved purely through individual choices. You can decide not to use neural interfaces, not to adopt certain technologies, but if these technologies become ubiquitous, you'll pay a significant social and economic price for this refusal. We need collective protections, regulations that establish clear limits on what can be done with neural data, laws that recognize mental privacy as a fundamental human right that cannot be alienated even with consent. But regulation alone won't be sufficient because technology always evolves faster than laws can keep up. We also need a cultural transformation in how we think about technology and progress. We need to overcome the simplistic narrative that technological innovation is always good, that resistance to new technologies is always ignorant Luddism. We need to develop more sophisticated discernment about which technological capabilities we should develop and which we should perhaps deliberately choose not to develop, even if we have the capacity to do so. This is a radical idea in a culture that venerates innovation without limits. But it's a conversation we need to have urgently. We also need to rethink education for the era of neural transparency. If our children will grow up in a world where their thoughts may not be completely private, they need tools to navigate this reality. They need robust metacognition, the ability to understand and regulate their own mental processes. They need critical literacy about how algorithmic systems work and how they can influence cognition. They need psychological resilience to maintain a sense of self in environments designed to shape their identities. These skills have always been important, but they're becoming absolutely essential for human autonomy in the 21st century. There's also a spiritual or existential dimension to this question that cannot be ignored even in an ostensibly secular analysis. Contemplative traditions, from Buddhism to Christian mysticism, have always recognized that our thoughts are not entirely ours, that we are constantly influenced by forces operating beyond our immediate awareness. Meditative practice in many traditions involves observing thoughts arise without completely identifying with them. Perhaps these ancient traditions have something to teach us about how to maintain mental balance in an era of neural transparency. Perhaps the key to preserving autonomy is not to strengthen the walls of privacy around our minds, but to develop a more fluid and less attached relationship with our own mental processes. If these reflections touched something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't been able to fully articulate, know that you're not alone in this unease. By subscribing to this channel, you'll connect with a community of people who share your concerns about the profound transformations we're experiencing and your desire to better understand where we're going as a species. Each week, we meet here to explore these fundamental questions about the future of consciousness, freedom, the human condition itself. This is not just a channel, but a space where we can think together about the deepest challenges of our era. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to preserve what's essentially human in us while navigating an increasingly complex technological future. Returning to our central question, the future I've described is not inevitable. Technological trajectories always involve choices, even when these choices aren't always conscious or deliberate. There are bifurcation points, moments where we can decide to go in one direction or another. And we're in one of those moments now. The next decisions we make as a society about how we develop and implement neural technologies will determine whether we evolve toward a future of total cognitive surveillance or whether we find ways to obtain the benefits of these technologies while preserving some sanctuary of mental privacy. But to make these choices wisely, we first need to look honestly at where we're going and have courageous conversations about what kind of future we want to create. The final irony in this entire story is that while I write and you read these words about the future of mental privacy, we're both probably doing so through devices that are already collecting data about our cognitive patterns. Every pause in my typing, every edit I make, is providing information about how my brain works. And every second your eyes spend on a particular section of this text, every moment where you stop to reflect, is being potentially captured and analyzed by systems designed to understand and predict human behavior. The transformation I've described is not something that will happen in the future. It's already happening. We're already living in the early stages of the era of neurotransparency. The question is not whether our thoughts will remain private, but how much of our mental privacy we're willing to trade and why. And this is a question each of us needs to answer, not just with our words, but with our daily choices about which technologies we adopt and which lines we refuse to cross. Because in the end, the future of our thoughts depends on the thoughts we choose to have about our future. And this choice, at least for now, is still ours to make.
The book is about the history of information. Nexus means connection, and information is connection. People often think about information as something related to truth, but most of the information in the world is not an attempt to tell the truth. It's not necessarily lies. If you think, for instance, about music, music is information, but music never tells the truth and never lies. There is a lot of bad music that people created over the years, but there is no fake music. It's just impossible to create fake music. What does music do? It connects people. It doesn't tell us the truth about something. It can make a lot of people in a club sway together to the sound of the same song. It can make a lot of soldiers march together in lockstep. It can make churchgoers to chant and to swing together. So this is what information does. It connects, and this is why the book is called Nexus, Connection. A lot of people hear AI, artificial intelligence. They think that intelligence is somehow connected to truth. So a super intelligent AI will have a kind of super access to truth. No, intelligence is not about truth. Intelligence is the ability to solve problems, to define goals and solve problems on the way to the goal. The truth is one of the things that can help you do that, but not the only one. And we have seen with human beings that human beings until today have been the most intelligent animals, entities on the planet, and at the same time, we have also been the most delusional entities on the planet. We believe nonsensical things that no chimpanzee and no dog and no horse would ever believe. And a super intelligence is very likely to be super delusional, even more deluded than we are. So we would need a very strong ethical basis, a very strong basis of values, more than even before, because the challenges are bigger.
There's already lots of people who are spending hours and hours and hours a day talking to and interacting with their AI best friends, their AI lovers, etc. That's only going to get way more sophisticated.
Absolutely.
And I think those folks, and I'm not excluding myself, who knows? I mean, I don't mean to other them. I think it's going to be very, very common. We're all going to get really emotionally attached to these AI characters that we interact with. And I think it's going to feel very natural to start talking about AI rights, comparing it to civil rights. And I'm quite concerned that if we go down that road, it could be very perilous. That affordance of those rights could go hand in hand with some of the worst dystopian outcomes that you describe in your book.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think one of the major things about AIs that we will see is that it will be able to create intimate relationships with human beings.
Yes.
I don't necessarily mean sexual. Could be also sexual, but intimate
Oh, it'll be
relationships.
sexual. That's what, not all it'll be, but...
Yeah, some. And it's very close. It's already beginning to happen. It will be a major issue in societies all over the world.